The air backstage was thick with the smell of dust and old velvet, smell that clung to the curtains and the heavy draped fabric lining the walls. For the little 6-year-old girl, it was the smell of a different world. Her world smelled of her mother's cooking, of the fresh laundry hung out to dry, and of the faint, electric scent of her small keyboard at home. This place was huge and echoing, a maze of wires and sandbags and people rushing past with serious looks on their faces. Her mother knelt in front of her, smoothing down the front of her simple, red dress. The dress was her pride and joy, hand-stitched late at night after the little girl had gone to sleep, made from a piece of fabric her mother had saved for months. "Are you ready, my love?" Her mother whispered, her hands gentle on the girl's small shoulders. The girl just nodded, her big eyes wide as she took in the chaos around her. She wasn't sure if she was ready. Her heart was thumping like a little bird trapped in her chest. She had practiced on her keyboard every single day, her fingers dancing over the plastic keys until they knew the music by heart. But this was different. This wasn't her quiet living room. This was the big stage of World's Got Talent, a place she had only ever seen on the flickering television screen. A man with a headset and a clipboard walked over. "Okay, we're ready for you." "Good luck," he said, his voice kind but rushed. He gave her a little pat on the head and then pointed towards a bright slit of light in the darkness. That was the entrance. That was the way to the stage. Her mother gave her one last tight hug. "Just play like you do at home," she whispered into her ear. "Just play for me. I love you." And then with a gentle push, she sent her daughter towards the light. The moment she stepped through the opening, the world changed. It was like walking into a different universe. A wall of heat and light hit her, so bright that she had to squint. The air was suddenly filled with a low, rumbling sound, and the sound of thousands of people breathing and shifting in their seats. It was a sea of faces stretching up and up into the darkness, all of them looking at her. She felt very, very small. Her feet, clad in her best black patent leather shoes, seemed to make no sound on the polished wooden floor as she walked forward. In the center of it all, sitting on a raised platform, was the biggest piano she had ever seen. It wasn't like her little keyboard. This one was a monster. It was a huge, shiny black creature, its lid propped up like a giant wing. It seemed to stare at her with all its white and black teeth. For a second, she wanted to turn around and run back to her mother, but then she remembered her promise. She kept walking. The 3 judges sat at a long, curved table a short distance away. They were like characters from a movie. The man in the middle was older, with neatly combed silver hair and a very serious face. He was a famous music critic, known for being very, very strict. To his left sat a woman with bright, shocking pink hair and a sparkly dress. She was a pop star that the girl's older sister loved. To the right was a man in a very sharp suit who looked like he owned a lot of buildings. He was a famous producer who had made many singers into stars. They had all seen 1,000 acts, 1,000 singers and dancers and magicians. They looked bored. As the little girl shuffled towards the center of the stage, the judges watched her. The man with the silver hair raised an eyebrow and exchanged a quick, almost invisible glance with the producer. It was a look that said, "Here we go again. Another cute kid." The woman with the pink hair offered a small, practiced smile. The kind you give when you're trying to be nice, but you're not really expecting much. The audience was quiet, a gentle, polite hush falling over the massive room. They were waiting for the cute moment, the little child who would maybe sing a nursery song or play a simple tune with one finger. It was a familiar part of the show. The girl finally reached the center of the stage, right in front of the judges' table. The microphone on its stand was too tall for her. A kind stagehand had to rush out and quickly lower it for her. She gave a nervous little wave to the crowd, her hand barely moving. Her feet dangled high above the floor when she sat on the special bench placed in front of the piano monster. She looked so tiny and fragile up there, a speck of red in a vast dark ocean. The head judge, the man with the silver hair, leaned forward into his microphone. His voice was smooth and deep, but it had a sharp edge to it like a piece of glass. "Well, hello there," he said, his voice echoing through the quiet theater. He didn't say her name, just there. "And what is your name, and how old are you?" he asked, though he already knew the answers from her application. The girl leaned into the microphone. Her voice so small it was almost swallowed by the huge room. "My name is, and I am 6 years old," she whispered. A few people in the audience let out a collective awe. The judge smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of an adult who is humoring a child. 6 years old? That is very young, he said, nodding slowly. That is a very big piano for such a little girl. Are you sure you can play that thing? A few light chuckles rippled through the audience. The girl just nodded again, her hands resting in her lap. The judge continued, his tone becoming even more condescending, like he was talking to a pet. "And what are you going to play for us today, little one? Something nice and simple? Twinkle, twinkle, little star." He leaned back in his chair, a smug, satisfied look on his face. He was setting her up for a gentle, dismissive comment later. He was already writing the critique in his head. The little girl took a deep breath. The air was hot and smelled like the lights. She looked past the judges, past the cameras, and thought of her mother in the wings. She thought of her small keyboard at home. She wasn't here to be cute. She was here to share the music that lived inside her. She leaned forward, her lips just brushing the cold metal of the microphone. And she spoke the name of the piece and the composer. It wasn't a simple name. It was a long, complicated foreign name. A name that belonged to a world of concert halls and genius composers. A name that had no business being whispered by a 6-year-old girl. On a talent show stage, the name hung in the air for a moment. The man with the silver hair stopped smiling. He leaned forward again, a frown creasing his forehead. The woman with the pink hair stopped fiddling with her pen and looked up, a confused expression on her face. The producer, who had been looking at his phone, suddenly put it down. They all stared at her. The head judge shook his head slightly, as if to clear his ears. He looked at his fellow judges, who all had the same look of disbelief on their faces. There was no way. She must have gotten the name wrong. She must have just repeated something she heard her parents say without understanding it. He was about to ask her to repeat herself, to say something simpler, something they could all understand. He was certain she had made a mistake. For a long moment, the name the little girl had spoken just hung in the air, shimmering under the hot stage lights. It was a name that didn't belong there, a name too heavy and too grand for the small person who had whispered it. The man with the silver hair stared at her, his mouth slightly open. He looked at the woman with the pink hair, who just shrugged, a look of complete confusion on her face. The producer leaned forward, his expensive suit rustling, and for the first time that evening, he looked truly interested. The audience, who had been waiting for a simple, cute performance, started to murmur. People leaned over to their neighbors, whispering, asking each other if they had heard correctly. Was this a joke? Was the child's parents putting her up to this? The head judge cleared his throat, the sound sharp and loud in the microphone. "Young lady," he began, his voice now stripped of its condescending tone and replaced with a firm, official one. "Are you quite sure that's the name of the piece you intend to play? It's a very, very difficult piece. One of the most difficult ever written for the piano?" The little girl didn't answer with words. She just nodded, her expression serious and determined. She wasn't doing this for a joke. She wasn't doing this to be clever. She was doing this because this was the music that lived inside her. The music she had spent hundreds of hours teaching herself on her small keyboard at home. She turned her body away from the judges and faced the piano. The huge black monster didn't seem so scary anymore. It looked like a friend that was waiting to share a secret with her. She adjusted the bench, her short legs not quite reaching the floor. She wiggled her fingers, a tiny ritualistic stretch she always did before playing. Then she took a deep, slow breath, just like her mother had taught her. She closed her eyes for a second, picturing the notes in her head, seeing them dance and flow like a river. When she opened them again, all the fear was gone. There was only the music, her small hands, which looked like tiny pale starfish against the vast white and black landscape of the keys, hovered for a moment. Then they descended. The first note was clear and pure, like a single drop of water falling into a still pond. It was a simple, sweet melody. The kind of tune a child might hum while swinging in a park or drawing a picture of a house with a bright yellow sun. A soft, gentle rhythm began to form, easy and predictable. It was lovely, but it was exactly what everyone had expected. A wave of relief seemed to wash over the theater. The judges relaxed. The man with the silver hair picked up his pen again, and a small, knowing smile returned to his lips. He had been right. It was just a child repeating a big name she had heard. He started to write on his notepad, probably something about her charming attempt or her brave spirit. The woman with the pink hair leaned back in her chair, her expression softening. It was a cute moment, after all. The producer glanced down at his phone, thinking the interesting part of the act was over. The audience settled into their seats, content to enjoy the sweet, simple performance. It was a nice, gentle interlude in a night of loud and flashy acts. But then something happened. It wasn't a sudden change. It was slow, like a cloud passing in front of the sun. A new sound wove its way into the simple tune. It was a harmony, a deeper, more complex sound that added a shadow to the bright melody. It was a note that didn't quite fit, a beautiful, sad shadow that fell across the happy little tune. It was the kind of sound that made you feel something, a gentle pang of nostalgia or a touch of sweet sorrow. The man with the silver hair's pen stopped moving. He lifted his head, his eyes narrowing. He knew this shadow. He recognized this turn in the melody. His heart gave a little jump. No, it couldn't be. The little girl's left hand, which had been playing simple, single notes, began to move differently. It started to play a pattern of its own, a flowing, intricate counter-melody that danced around the original tune. It was like watching two people having a conversation, one happy and one thoughtful. Their voices weaving together to create something entirely new. The simple tune was still there, but it was no longer alone. It was now the foundation for something much, much bigger. The woman with the pink hair put down her pen. She sat up straighter, her friendly, practiced smile gone, replaced by a look of intense focus. She was a musician too, in her own way, and she knew what she was hearing was not simple. This was not a child's fumbling. This was deliberate. This was skill. The producer slowly, deliberately, placed his phone face down on the table. He was no longer bored. He was now completely captivated, his eyes fixed on the small figure at the piano. The tempo began to change, too. It was getting faster, but not in a rushed or clumsy way. It was a natural, steady acceleration, like a river that had been flowing calmly, and now felt the pull of a steeper slope. The notes started to come more quickly, but they were all perfect. Each one was clear and precise, placed exactly where it needed to be. The girl's small hands were now moving with a confidence that seemed impossible for someone so young. Her right hand flew over the higher keys, while her left hand created a powerful, rolling foundation on the lower notes. The two parts were separate, yet they were completely connected, telling a single, complex story. The silence in the auditorium deepened. It was no longer the polite silence of an audience waiting for a performance to end. It was the rapt, breathless silence of thousands of people who were realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. No one was coughing. No one was whispering. No one was looking at their phones. All eyes were on the stage, on the little girl in the red dress who seemed to be growing with the music. She was no longer just a 6-year-old. She was a conduit, a vessel for a powerful and beautiful force. The simple, childlike melody was a distant memory. A sweet opening line to a story that was now becoming epic and full of emotion. The judges stared, their faces masks of disbelief and awe. The cute little kid act had vanished, and in its place, a profound and breathtaking talent was revealing itself, note by perfect, shocking note. The gentle, flowing river of music that had been building suddenly hit a steep cliff. Without warning, it tumbled over the edge, transforming into a roaring, chaotic waterfall of sound. The change was so sudden and so powerful that a few people in the audience actually jumped in their seats. The sweet, simple melody was gone, swallowed by a torrent of notes that cascaded from the piano at an impossible speed. The little girl's right hand was a blur, a flicker of motion over the keys, so fast it seemed like a trick of the light. Each note, however, was not a blur. Each one was a clear, sparkling drop of water in the torrent. Perfectly placed, perfectly timed, creating a sound that was both wildly complex and beautifully clear. Her left hand, which had been dancing a thoughtful counter-melody, now became the storm itself. It began to play deep, powerful chords that rumbled through the floorboards and vibrated up through the seats. It was a sound you felt in your chest, a low, thunderous growl that gave the waterfall of high notes a dark, dramatic foundation. It was the sound of a giant's footsteps, the sound of a storm gathering its strength on the horizon. The two hands were no longer having a conversation. They were locked in a passionate, dramatic argument, one soaring and crying out while the other rumbled and shook the very foundations of the theater. The girl was completely lost in the storm. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her face a mask of intense concentration and raw emotion. Her small body swayed back and forth, not in a rehearsed, pretty way, but with the natural, powerful rhythm of someone completely possessed by the music. Her red dress swirled around her, a flash of color in the dim light. She was no longer sitting on the bench. She was leaning into the piano, her entire being focused on channeling the immense power that was flowing through her. She was a tiny conductor, and the orchestra was the entire massive grand piano, an instrument that seemed to have come alive under her hands. The man with the silver hair, stern critic, had completely frozen. His pen, which had been ready to write a dismissive note, had slipped from his fingers and now lay on the table, forgotten. His jaw was literally hanging open, a sight his colleagues had never seen in all their years of working with him. He was a man who knew music. He had studied it for 50 years. He knew every note of this incredibly difficult piece. And he knew that what he was hearing was not just good for a 6-year-old. It was good. It was technically flawless, emotionally devastating, and played with a passion that seasoned professionals spent a lifetime trying to achieve. He was staring at a miracle, and his carefully constructed world of logic and expertise was crumbling before his eyes. The woman with the pink hair was no longer a judge on a talent show. She was just a person, feeling the music wash over her. A single tear had escaped her eye and was now tracing a path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but another one followed. The music was telling a story of great struggle and soaring hope, of deep loss and incredible joy. It was the story of a life, all packed into a few minutes of breathtaking sound. She had felt that kind of passion in her own music, but to see it coming from this tiny child, this innocent little girl, was overwhelming. It was pure, unfiltered emotion. It was breaking her heart in the most beautiful way. The producer. The man in the sharp suit was leaning so far forward that he was in danger of falling off his chair, but he didn't notice. His mind was racing, not with musical analysis, but with numbers, with possibilities, with the sheer, unadulterated gold mine he was witnessing. He wasn't just seeing a talented kid. He was seeing a star. He was seeing headlines, sold-out concerts, and a story that would inspire millions. He saw the raw, authentic talent that couldn't be taught, couldn't be manufactured, the one thing every person in his business searched for their entire lives and rarely found. He looked from the girl to the audience, who were all staring, mesmerized, and he knew. He just knew. The audience itself had become a single, breathing entity. The polite silence had turned into something sacred, something heavy and electric. No one moved. No one spoke. Thousands of people were holding their breath together, afraid that even the smallest sound might break the spell. An old man in the third row, who had come to the show with his granddaughter because he won free tickets, had his hand over his mouth, his eyes wide with wonder. He hadn't felt this alive in years. A young woman in the back, who was cynical about reality television, had tears streaming down her face, her phone forgotten in her purse. They were all connected, not by the lights of the stage or the cameras filming them, but by the raw, powerful, universal language that was pouring out of the piano. Then, just as the storm reached its peak of chaotic power, a strange and wonderful thing happened. The thundering chords from the left hand softened. The waterfall of notes from the right hand slowed. The music didn't just stop, it changed direction. It entered the eye of the storm. A new melody emerged, fragile and delicate, like a single bird singing after a rainstorm. It was a moment of pure, quiet beauty, a stark contrast to the power that had come before. In this quiet section, the girl's skill was even more apparent. The control it took to go from such wild chaos to such gentle peace was immense. Her touch was featherlight, her fingers caressing the keys, drawing out a sound so soft, so pure, that it felt like a secret being whispered directly to each person in the room. This moment of peace did not last long. It was just a breath, a brief pause before the final assault. The delicate melody began to build again, gaining strength and speed. The thunder returned, first as a low rumble, then growing louder and more insistent. The girl's body began to sway more forcefully, her head bending low over the keys as if she was praying to the music gods. She was pouring every ounce of her energy, every bit of her soul, into this final climactic run. The notes came faster and faster, a whirlwind of sound and emotion. A desperate, joyful, tragic, triumphant cry that filled every corner of the vast theater. It was the sound of a heart breaking and healing all at once. And then, with one final dramatic push of her small hands, she played the last chord. It was not one note, but many, a massive, complex sound that seemed to contain all the power of the entire performance. It was a sound that filled the air, a sound that shook the walls, a sound that felt like it would go on forever. And then it hung there, a single, resonant, earth-shaking chord that vibrated through the floor, through the seats, through the bones of every single person in the room. It held for what felt like an eternity, a final, powerful statement before the silence. Finally, the sound began to fade, slowly, slowly, until the last echo disappeared into the rafters. And in its place there was nothing. A silence so complete, so profound, that it was louder than the music had been. The little girl's hands rested on the keys, her head still bowed. Her chest was rising and falling with deep, heavy breaths. She was exhausted. Slowly, she lifted her head and opened her eyes. The bright lights seemed to surprise her, as if she was waking up from a long, intense dream. She looked out at the thousands of faces, all staring at her in stunned silence. And a look of shy confusion crossed her face. For a moment, she was just a little girl again, lost on a big stage, wondering what had just happened. The silence that followed the final fading note was the heaviest thing in the room. It was a physical presence, a thick, blanketing quiet that pressed down on everyone. The stage lights seemed to hum louder in the absence of music. Dust motes, invisible during the performance, now danced in the bright beams like tiny, confused stars. The little girl's hands were still resting on the keys, her fingers curled slightly as if they were reluctant to let go. Her head was bowed, her small shoulders rising and falling with each deep breath she took. She looked exhausted, as if she had just run a marathon or fought a great battle. In a way she had, for a full 2 seconds. Nobody moved. The judges were statues, their faces frozen in expressions of pure, unadulterated shock. The man with the silver hair was staring at the girl, his mouth still slightly agape, his eyes wide with a disbelief so profound it looked like pain. The woman with the pink hair had both hands covering her mouth, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The producer was leaning forward, his elbows on the table, his hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles were white. He was staring at the stage as if he was trying to solve an impossible puzzle in the audience. Thousands of people sat frozen too. They were a painting of collective astonishment. An old man had his glasses perched on top of his head, forgotten. A teenage boy had his mouth full of popcorn, unmoving. A mother held her sleeping child a little tighter, her eyes fixed on the small figure on stage. They had all come for a night of entertainment, for a few laughs and a few gasps. They had not come to have their souls stirred by a 6-year-old girl. They were not prepared for this. Then, from the back of the theater, a single sound broke the spell. It was the sound of one person clapping. It wasn't a loud clap. It was a slow, deliberate, almost hesitant clap. The sound of someone who was not sure if they were allowed to break the sacred silence, but who felt so moved that they had to do something. Then someone else joined in. A few more claps from different sections of the theater. They were isolated at first, like raindrops hitting a tin roof. But then they began to connect, to form a rhythm. The man with the silver hair was the first of the judges to move. He slowly, deliberately brought his hands together and began to clap. It was not the polite, perfunctory clap of a judge doing his job. It was the clap of a master acknowledging a masterpiece. It was slow, respectful, and full of awe. That was the signal. The woman with the pink hair lowered her hands from her face and began to applaud, tears still streaming down her cheeks. The producer jumped to his feet, clapping loudly and shouting, "Bravo, bravo!" And then the dam broke. The sound started as a low rumble, then grew into a deafening roar. It was the sound of thousands of people exploding with emotion. It's a wave of applause so loud it shook the very foundations of the building. One by one, then in groups, then all at once, the entire audience rose to their feet. The theater became a sea of standing, cheering, crying people, all their attention focused on the tiny girl at the piano. The sound was overwhelming, a physical force that washed over the stage. The little girl, who had been lost in her post-performance exhaustion, was startled by the sudden wall of sound. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with confusion. She saw the ocean of people on their feet, all of them smiling and clapping for her. She saw the judges, all three of them standing and applauding her. She didn't understand. For a moment, she looked scared, like a small animal caught in the headlights of a giant truck. Her eyes darted around the huge dark room, searching for something familiar, something safe. Then she saw her mother. Her mother was standing in the wings, just at the edge of the light. She was not clapping. She had her hands pressed to her mouth, and tears were streaming down her face. But her eyes were shining with a pride so bright it seemed to light up the darkness around her. She was nodding, a slow, steady nod that said, "You did it. You did it. I am so proud of you." Seeing her mother's face, the girl's fear melted away. A small, shy smile touched her lips. She remembered what she was supposed to do. She slid off the piano bench, her little shoes making a soft tap on the floor. She turned to face the judges and the audience and gave a clumsy little bow. It was the bow of a child, not a performer, and it was the most charming thing anyone had ever seen. This simple, humble gesture only made the crowd cheer louder. The applause continued for a long time, a full minute of pure, unadulterated appreciation. Finally, the man with the silver hair held up his hands, signaling for quiet. The roar slowly subsided, settling back into a hum of excited whispers. He leaned into his microphone, and for the first time all night, his voice was not sharp or condescending. It was soft, filled with a sense of wonder and humility. "Young lady," he began, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Young lady, I don't know what to say," shook his head, looking down at his hands, then back up at her. "In all my years, I have never heard anything like that. That was not just a performance. That was a miracle." He paused, taking a deep breath. "You have to tell us where did you learn to play like that? Who is your teacher? They must be a genius." The little girl walked back to the microphone, which the kind stagehand had lowered for her earlier. She leaned in, her small voice barely a whisper, but in the quiet room, everyone could hear her. "I don't have a teacher," she said. The judges exchanged stunned glances. The woman with the pink hair stepped forward to her own microphone. "No teacher? But honey, that piece. That's one of the hardest pieces ever written. It takes years of training to even attempt it." The girl just shrugged, a simple, honest gesture. "I know," she said. "But I don't have a piano either." This statement hung in the air, even more shocking than the name of the piece she had announced earlier. No piano? No teacher? It was impossible. The producer spoke up, his voice full of urgency. "What do you mean you don't have a piano? How did you practice?" The girl looked out into the audience, towards her mother in the wings, as if for strength. We can't afford a piano," she explained softly. "They are very big and very expensive. My mom, she found a small keyboard at a second-hand shop. It's old, and some of the keys don't work very well, and it sounds a little bit tinny. But it's mine." She paused, a small smile on her face, as she thought of her keyboard. I watch videos on the internet, she continued. Old videos of people playing. I watch their hands, and I try to copy them. I listen to the music over and over again until I can hear it in my head when I'm sleeping. Then I just try to make my fingers do what their fingers do. I play by ear. I don't know how to read the music notes. The entire theater was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was a silence of profound respect and deep emotion. The story was more incredible than the performance. This wasn't the product of a privileged upbringing and the best teacher's money could buy. This was something else entirely. This was raw, natural, God-given talent, nurtured by nothing but pure love and incredible determination.
How long do you practice every day?
The woman with the pink hair asked, her voice trembling. Every day, the girl said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. After school, I do my homework, and then I play until my mom tells me it's time for dinner, and then I play a little more before I go to sleep. The man with the silver hair sank back into his chair, a look of utter defeat on his face. It was the defeat of a man who thought he understood the world, only to find out that the world was full of magic he never knew existed. He had judged this little girl before she even played a note. He had dismissed her, pitied her, and prepared to write her off as a cute but untalented child. And she had just shown him that he knew nothing at all. He looked at her, this small, humble girl with her old keyboard and her grainy videos, and he saw not just a great musician, but a masterclass in dedication, a testament to the idea that true passion can overcome any obstacle. The silence that followed the little girl's simple explanation was heavier than the one that had followed her music. It was a silence filled with a profound, aching understanding. The story of the old secondhand keyboard and the grainy online videos was more stunning. It's more unbelievable than the flawless performance itself. It was a story that stripped away all the excuses people make for themselves. A story that spoke of a love for something so pure that it could overcome any obstacle. The judges stared at her, not as a contestant on a show, but as a living, breathing lesson in dedication. The man with the silver hair. The head judge slowly lowered himself back into his chair. He felt a strange tightening in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. It was humility. He had spent his life sitting in judgment of others, armed with his knowledge and his experience, believing he had a right to decide what was good and what was bad, what was talent and what was noise. He had looked at this small child and seen a novelty act, a brief, cute moment before the next big thing. He had been so wrong. He was not just wrong. He was foolish. He had been looking at a diamond and thinking it was a piece of glass. The weight of his own arrogance settled on him, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt small. The woman with the pink hair was the first to speak, her voice thick with unshed tears. She didn't use her microphone. She just spoke, her voice carrying in the quiet room. You know, she said, looking directly at the little girl, I have a room full of expensive instruments in my house. Guitars, keyboards, a grand piano, and sometimes I don't feel like playing. I get tired or I get distracted. And then you come out here with a keyboard that doesn't even work properly. And you make more music, more real music than I have in years. You have a gift, honey. But more than that, you have a heart. And that is the most important thing. Her voice broke on the last few words, and she had to turn away for a moment to compose herself. The producer. The man in the sharp suit shook his head in a slow, steady motion, as if trying to clear it. I have been in this business for 30 years, he said, his voice low and serious. I have signed artists, I have built careers, I have seen trends come and go. I have always looked for the it factor, that special something that makes a person a star. I thought I knew what it was. I thought it was a certain look, a certain style, a certain marketability. Tonight, you have shown me that I was wrong. The it factor isn't something you can see or market. The it factor is what you have. It's a fire inside. It's a love so pure for what you do that it shines out of you and lights up the entire world. I have no words. I am honored to have been here to see it. The little girl stood there, taking it all in. She didn't fully understand the impact she had made. She just knew that these important people were being very nice to her, and that the crowd was still clapping softly. She looked down at her shoes, feeling a little shy under all the attention. Then the head judge stood up. He walked out from behind the judge's table and stood at the front of the stage, closer to the little girl. The theater fell silent again, everyone sensing that something important was about to happen. He looked down at the girl, his expression no longer stern or critical, but gentle and full of a deep, newfound respect. "Young lady," he began, his voice clear and strong, but with a softness no one had ever heard from him before. "When you walked out on this stage tonight, I saw a 6-year-old girl. I saw a child in a pretty red dress, and I made a judgment. I judged you before you even touched a single key, and for that I am truly sorry." He paused, and the audience was completely still, hanging on his every word. "You did not come here tonight to be judged. You came here tonight to teach. You've taught me that true talent has nothing to do with age, or with expensive lessons, or with the right connections. You taught me that passion is the greatest teacher of all. You taught me that music is not about the notes on a page. It's about the story in the heart." He looked from the girl to the audience, then back to her. "This show is about finding a winner. But tonight we have all won. We have all been reminded of what is possible when you love something with your whole soul. I came here looking for an act to put through to the next round. But that is not good enough for you. What you have deserves more than that. It deserves to be shared with the entire world." He turned and walked back to the judges' table. The other 2 judges watched him, their eyes wide with anticipation. He looked at them, and they both nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. He reached out his hand not towards the girl, but towards a large red button that sat in the center of the table. It was a button that was only used once a season, a button that changed a contestant's life forever. He looked at the little girl one last time, a small, genuine smile on his face. "My dear," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "are going straight to the live shows." And with that, he slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. A loud, triumphant fanfare blasted through the speakers, a sound of pure celebration and victory. At the same moment, the golden buzzer lit up, sending a brilliant golden glow across the judges' table. And then, from the ceiling above the stage, it began to rain. It wasn't water, it was golden confetti. Thousands and thousands of shimmering golden paper squares, showering down over the stage like a beautiful magical snowstorm. The little girl looked up, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise and delight. She had never seen anything so beautiful. She spun around in a slow circle, her arms outstretched, trying to catch the golden pieces as they fell all around her. Her red dress swirled, and the golden paper stuck in her hair, making her look like a tiny, sparkling angel. The audience erupted again, their cheers and applause even louder than before. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the moment of pure, unadulterated joy that the golden buzzer represented. From the wings, her mother came running onto the stage. She didn't care about the cameras or the judges or the cheering crowd. She only had eyes for her daughter. She swept the little girl up in her arms, holding her so tightly, burying her face in her daughter's hair. Her body was shaking with sobs, but these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, overwhelming pride and joy. All the long nights, all the sacrifices, all the hopes she had for her child were coming true in this one perfect, golden moment. The little girl hugged her mother back, burying her face in her shoulder, feeling safe and loved amidst the beautiful chaos. The other judges rushed onto the stage as well. The woman with the pink hair hugged the mother, then knelt down and gave the little girl a gentle kiss on the cheek. The producer patted the father on the back, who had also come on stage, a look of stunned happiness on his face. The formal barrier between the judges and the contestants had been completely shattered, replaced by a shared human connection. The golden confetti continued to fall. Covering the stage in a glittering blanket, the little girl, still in her mother's arms, reached out and picked up a single piece of golden paper. She held it in her small hand, looking at it as if it was the most precious treasure in the world. In a way it was. It was a symbol of her dream, a dream that had started on a small, tinny keyboard in a quiet living room and had now blossomed into a reality on the biggest stage in the world. Under a shower of gold, the music faded and the confetti finally stopped. The stage was a mess, a beautiful, sparkling mess. But no one cared. The little girl and her family stood in the center of it all, surrounded by the judges, under the bright lights. The head judge walked over to them and knelt down, so he was eye to eye with the little girl. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but full of emotion. "Thank you for your music, and thank you for your story. You have changed something in all of us tonight. Don't you ever stop playing." The little girl just nodded, a shy smile on her face, still clutching the piece of golden confetti. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know about record deals or concerts or fame. All she knew was that she had played her music, and people had listened. And her mother was hugging her, and everything was golden. As they walked off the stage, hand in hand, leaving a trail of golden paper behind them, she knew, with a certainty that only a child can have, that her life would never be the same again. And that was a wonderful, wonderful thing.